inside it. You will develop a cough, fever, and conjunctivitis, typically 10 to 12 days after infection. 14 to 16 days, you get an appearance of a rash and a high fever. 19 to 23 days, in most normal individuals, the virus is cleared because our immune system has got rid of it. So we have now acquired immunity to that virus. However, in some people, in about 1 in 20 children, infection with the measles virus leads to pneumonia. And that is when it becomes really dangerous, because that can be fatal. Now, where does the virus go once you have inhaled it? Well, it can live in epithelial cells, endothelial cells, and immune cells. And actually, the first cells which are typically infected are the cells in the lungs, and it's macrophages and dendritic cells. As we go along and you'll learn a little bit more about the immune system, you will know that macrophages and dendritic cells are antigen-presenting cells. So these cells travel to the lymph cells where they present antigen to T and B cells. And the T and B cells becomes infected. So that's the primary infection. Now, secondary infection occurs around day 4 to 7, where the virus is disseminated to other organs in the body. So spleen, lymphatic tissue, liver, thymus, skin, and lungs. Okay, so that was the virus. Does anybody want to say anything about viruses before we move on to bacteria? Any comments? Anything you're burning to say? No? Everybody is still here? Everybody's still listening? Okay, so we're going to talk about bacteria now. So bacteria, you probably know, are larger than viruses. Also, bacteria don't necessarily or don't need to infect cells to proliferate. They can be intracellular or they can be extracellular. So free living, like a parasite, don't need to get into the cell to replicate. That is one of the main differences. Obviously a very important one for you to recognize. Now, bacteria have got different shapes, and you can see them down in the picture here. So we have got here in green, which is the spiral-shaped bacteria. We have got the rod-shaped bacteria, which is the one in the middle here. And then we have got this spherical-shaped bacteria, which is the ones in blue, as you can see here. Now, bacteria are prokaryotes, so they don't have a nucleus. And this is another important thing for you to remember. So they are prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. So the DNA is in the cytoplasm. It is not in the nucleus, like in eukaryotic cells. They have a cell wall. We'll look at that in a very minute. In the next slide, we'll have a look at what they actually look like and what they consist of. Now, the structure of them really very much depends on what species of bacteria they belong to. So here we've got the structure of the bacteria. So there's some essential structures and there's some particular structures. So particular structures which only certain kinds of bacteria have got and others don't. So we've got a cell wall. We've got a cell membrane, as you can see here. You have got cytoplasm, and then you have got the nuclear material. So DNA, but it is not found in the actual nucleus. It is found in the cytoplasm of the cell. Now, some bacteria also have got a capsule. So you can see the capsule here. It encapsulates the bacteria in the cell wall. Some have got what is called a flagella and a pili. So the flagella here is often used for movement of the bacteria, and the pili are often used for it to attach to cells. Now here's an example of a bacterial infection, tuberculosis, which I am sure that you're all probably pretty much aware of. It is the #1 cause of death from an infectious bacterial disease worldwide. And about a third of the world's population are infected with the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's very contagious, spreads by coughing and sneezing again. It's one of the biggest spreaders of the disease is actually animals. So you can see a cow down here, because cows can be infected with this bacteria, and it spreads to you through eating dairy products which hasn't been proper pasteurized, so the bacteria hasn't been killed. Now, tuberculosis can be cured with antibiotics. However, it is a very long course of antibiotic, but it is curable. One type of tuberculosis which is more difficult to cure is what is called drug-resistant tuberculosis. Because drug resistance obviously means that it doesn't respond very well to antibiotics. You can be cured if you've got multi-drug resistant tuberculosis though, but it does require a combination of antibiotics. Now, how common is it? Well, about 9.6 million cases of TB is diagnosed every year, and 1.5 million dies from the infection. The symptoms are fever, night sweats and weight loss. It infects the lung initially. And again, it is the macrophages which is infected with the bacteria. So if you remember the measles virus that we looked at, it was also macrophages and dendritic cells which became infected. And that spreads to other places in the body because these are bringing it to the lymphs. Now, there is a vaccine against tuberculosis. It's Bacillus calmette-guerin, which is actually a live vaccine. It's a weakened strain of the tuberculosis bacteria that people are given. Now, you can see there's a little link down here. You can have a look at that link after the lecture, and it will tell you much more about how the bacteria infects and spreads. Now, this is showing the incidences of tuberculosis 2017. You can see that they're divided into high incidence and low incidence. I have highlighted China here. So China actually belongs to the high incident group. There's 63 people per 100,000 of the population which contract this disease. If we look on the other side, you can see that Britain belongs to the low incident group. So not many incidents of tuberculosis in the UK or indeed in many of the European countries, as you can see here. Okay, so that was bacteria. We're now going to talk about fungi. So you probably know that these are obviously much larger, and very often you can actually see these. You don't need a microscope, except if you want, if you're looking for the spores. So we'll come back to the spores in a minute, because they are microscopic. So this is how fungal infection spreads, it's through spores, and they are microscopic. So fungi really begin their lives as a spore, and that spore is produced by a mature fungi. You can see that in those two pictures, which is shown on the right side here. These spores germinate and they develop into a filament, so filamental networks, which is called a mycelium. You can see that here. Oh, where is my? There, you can see the mycelium here, and you can also see it down in the picture down here, the mycelium that these spores have developed down here. Now, the individual filaments, they're called a hypna, and these hypnas, which is kind of like a long elongated tube, they can secrete a whole lot of digestive enzymes, which allows them to infiltrate into food sources, etc. These hypnas are also where food absorption or nutrient absorption occurs. The fruiting or the body of the fungi is formed by fusion of cells. We'll look at that a bit more in a minute. And it's these fruiting bodies, which I've already said, that is actually producing the spores, which allows the fungi to spread. Here is just an example of fungi. So you know there's many different types of fungi. So we've got the mushroom up here, and down here in the petrages, we've got mold. So you might have seen mold. Maybe if your bread has got too old, it will grow mold on it. Now, fungi, unlike bacteria, are eukaryotes. So what does that mean? Well, you should really all know what that means. It means that they have a nucleus, and it's in that nucleus that they carry their DNA. Okay, so the example we're going to look at is a fungal infection, which is caused by a yeast, which is called Candida albicans. Now, this yeast is really part of the normal flora on your mucosal surfaces, so your mouth, your rectum, and your vagina. This yeast lives. And it's an opportunistic infection, which really means that in people which are immune suppressed for whatever reason that might be, they often get proliferation of this yeast, and an infection occurs because it's no longer kept in check by the immune system. Now, in people that does not have a serious immune dysfunction, it can also cause skin, nail, and vaginal problems. It actually takes different form depending on where the infection occurs in your body. So the form in mouth thrush compared to nappy rash, for example, is not the same. So morphologically, it looks different. So there's different stages in the cycle of this fungus, and it possesses the ability to change its morphology. So it can grow with 3 distinct morphologies. Yeast, which is the first one you see here. So these are yeast cells, so it's single round cells, as you can see. It can grow as what is called a pseudohypna, which is what you see here. So this is where we've got these short, kind of incomplete budding. So the cell you can see is elongating. but it remains attached. The last one is what is called the hypna. And you can see here what the hypna looks like. So these are the three different morphological ways in which this fungi can grow. So that really means the immune response must control both budding yeast cells, pseudohypna, or hypna in this particular case. Here is just an example. So we've got nappy rash and you've got mouth thrush, as you can see down here. So here's hypna, you can see here. But this is just another picture of somebody that has got mouth thrush. Now this fungus, although it does not tend to, in some cases you can get what is called systemic disease. So this is where the fungus enters the bloodstream and travels to other organs. Now this can be really quite serious because there's a 30 to 50% mortality rate with systemic disease. Skin lesions are seen in about 10% of people. Inflammation in the eye is very common as well. Septic shock, so hypertension, high heart rate, rapid breathing. And the thing with systemic candidiasis is that it's not very easy to detect. So if you're tested for it, 40 to 60% will actually come back as being negative. Okay, so the last group of organisms that we're going to talk about is parasitic infections. Now, so parasites can be multicellular or they can be unicellular. Look at some examples of that. They can be intracellular or they can be extracellular. So some of them infect cells, some of them live externally, so do not need to infect cells. They've got different sizes, and we'll look at different examples of that in a minute. They live in different locations. We'll look at the life cycles of some of them and go through that as well. And typically infection is obviously caused when the immune system can't control the parasite. Now, there are three main classes of parasites that can cause disease in humans. They're called protozoa, helminth, and ectoparasites. And now, a protozoa is really microscopic, one-celled organisms. A good example of that is malaria thrombocytis, is 1 to 2 microns in size. Ectoparasites, this is really organisms that attach or burrow itself under the skin, and then they remain there for a relatively long period of time. Example includes things such as ticks and fleas and lice and mites. I'm sure you all know what these are. Now, the large group is the helminths. So these are obviously very large multicellular organisms. The tapeworm, for example, of which the picture is here on the right side. So this is tapeworm, which is attached to the stomach wall. This tapeworm can get up to 15 meters in size, so very, very large organisms. Routes of infections. Most parasites are partially developed before they're capable of infecting their principal host, and we'll get back to this in a minute. So in some occasions, human can be the principal host, but on some occasions, you would have what is called an intermediate host. Now, typical routes of infections are obviously ingestion of infected larvae or eggs, so either through fecal or oral route. It can also be that the parasite can actively penetrate the skin, so larvae or bites, for example, mosquito bites, etc. They actually penetrate the principles of the host's skin. The parasite can be maternally transmitted, so it may cross the placenta and infect the fetus before it's born. It can also infect the newborn through breast milk. Now, all these parasites have got a life cycle. We will look at some of them. And then obviously it's really important to know the life cycle of some of these so that we can intervene. There's possibilities of intervening in different stages of that life cycle in order to control the parasite or indeed the infection. And in many cases, you will realize later on, not in this lecture today or this week, second year, you probably will start hearing about some of the drugs which are effective against parasites, and you will then realize that actually what these do is they attack or they're effective against different stages of the parasite development. Okay, so how does the immune system deal with such a large variety of different parasites? Well, the intracellular parasites are recognized by the immune system, which can then kill the cell. Now, some are killed by T cells, so they're eliminated by T cells. Others are killed by activating the infected cell. So some cells, which you will learn later on this week, have got phagocytotic capacity. If they become activated, they can actually kill the parasite. Others don't have that capability, but they can present antigen on the surface of the cell, and that will activate T cells, which will then eliminate the infection. However, it's obviously slightly different if it's an extracellular parasite, because extracellular parasites are obviously too big to be killed by phagocytotic or T cells, for example. So we just looked at the size of some of these worms, for example, and they're far too big to be killed by immune cells. So what happens in this case, what happened in this case is that the parasite is damaged by immune cells, which are secreting a whole lot of cytokine and chemokines, which can damage the parasite so that gut parasites, for example, will be expelled. So we just poo them out. And tissue parasites can be damaged and broken down by these chemo and cytokines that can be produced by some of these immune cells. But both of these require cooperation between a large variety of different immune cells and different mechanisms. So we'll talk a bit about the different immune cells a bit later on this week. So let's look at some examples. So these are worms. So we have got Ascaris and Trichoris. So Ascaris is small intestine roundworms. It's very common. It's the most common infection worldwide. Another group is hookworms. So we have got Nicata and Ancylostoma. And these are, so sorry, I should have said that these roundworms and whipworms, which are indicated here at the top, people most commonly get infected by consuming the eggs from these worms. Hookworms, on the other hand, infection really occurs by immature, so not fully mature worms, which penetrate the skin. We'll look at an example of that in a minute. The most common infection in the UK is this enteropeus, which is pinworms. And really, it's very common in children. And it's these tiny, small, white worms. Now, I've already said that some of these worms can get really, really big. And then there's an example down here of a large intestinal roundworm, which is a very common helminth infections. And you can see that it can actually get up to 35 meters in size. So very big. What's the symptoms of having infections with worm? Well, very often it's associated with diarrhea. You might have blood and feces. The way that actually it's detected in most cases, it's also by passing some worm in your feces. So some of the worms will come out in your feces. You might have mild severe stomach pains, nausea, vomiting, and weight loss can also be very common. Weight loss is obviously very common, particularly with the bigger worms, because they need nutrients to grow. So they take a lot of the nutrients for their growth rather than it being absorbed and you being able to use it to maintain your own body weight. Okay, so let's look at the life cycle of some of these. So I can't actually see which worm this one is at the top. What does it say at the top there? Okay, you should be able to see it. I think this one is the roundworm. Anyway, so these live in the lumen of the small intestine, and the female can actually produce up to 240,000 eggs in a day. And all of these eggs can be passed through feces. Now these eggs, so if we look at the picture down here, where is my here? Okay, so they're passed by the feces, as you can see here. Now, they then embryonate and become infective after 18 days to several weeks. It very much depends on the environment. So they really like moist and warm shaded places. And these infective larvae or eggs are then swallowed. So you can see you're swallowing them here. They hatch and then they invade the intestinal mucosa. They're carried via the portal and the systemic circulation to the lungs. It matures in the lungs, takes 10 to 14 days. And then the larva penetrates the alveolar walls and it moves its ways up the bronchial tree to the throat, and then you re-swallow it. And it moves into the intestine, that's how it gets to the intestine and develops into an adult worm. Now, between 2 and 3 months are required for you ingesting the infective egg to the adult female is developed. They can live for a really long time, these worms, 1 to 2 years. There is 900 million infections a year and 20,000 deaths. So 20,000 people will die from the infection. Okay, so moving on to hookworms. How common is infection with hookworms? Well, between 6 and just over 7 million people infected annually. In 10% of cases, they cause anemia. They can impair the physical and intellectual development of children, And they really are most common, though, in underdeveloped countries, so poverty-stricken areas, such as some places in Africa and East Asia. Now, their life cycle is shown here. So in this case, it's not the egg that you're ingesting. In this case, it's actually a larva which is penetrating typically through the skin of your foot. So the adult worms live in the lumen of the small intestine. A female can produce 30,000 eggs a day. And again, these are obviously passed through the thesis. These eggs will embryonate and they will hatch. Again, it very much depends on the temperature. They like warm, shaded soil, etc. They will develop and hatch into larvae. And the larva, it can then penetrate the skin, typically from you, for example, standing on it, and it will penetrate through the skin on your foot. The larva matures in the lungs, and like we saw with the previous type of worms, it matures in the lungs and it then makes its way up through the bronchial tree to the throat, and then you're swallowing it. And that's how it gets into the small intestine. And in the small intestine, it can then develop into an adult worm. They can again live for quite a long time, 1 to 5 years. So quite a long time. Here is just some pictures of the hookworm, and obviously they're quite easy to distinguish because you can see that they've got these very distinguished hooks here. And down here, you can see one that has penetrated the skin here through the foot of this individual. Now, the last one we're going to talk about is tapeworms, and it's slightly different compared to the two others because it's got an intermediate host. So it it goes through cattle and pigs before it can infect humans. So again, eggs, which might be lying in grass, etc., is consumed by cattle or pigs. It develops into what is called an oncosphere, and that oncosphere hatches and it penetrates into the muscle of these animals. And obviously, if you're then eating meat from one of these animals which has not been cooked proper, it's either raw and it's undercooked, then you can become infected by the tapeworm. Here's just some pictures of the tapeworm. Okay, so there is a couple of questions here. Now, you're not a very chatty bunch, so I would suggest that you have a look at these, and then in the next lecture, we will go through these questions and you have to answer them, okay? So you need to speak. Now, before we finish, so this is kind of the end of the lecture today. But before we finish, does any of you have any questions?
Can you share your PowerPoint with us?
Yes, so this PowerPoint is already on my place.
It's very different from ours from my place.
No, if you go down at the bottom of my place, so let me see, I should be able to find it here and share it with you. So if we go on to my place, at the bottom it says, at the bottom it says CPU, I think, doesn't it? Is anybody on my place? No? But it should be there. Right, so let's go in here. So I think okay, so let me share my screen. So if you go to the My Place page, share screen. If you go to the My Place page, down at the bottom, can you see this now? It says CPU. Oh, it's hidden from students. Okay, I shall open that up for you. So I will open this up. Sorry, I thought it was open, but it's actually not open. So what I will do is I will open that for you straight away so that you can see the slides because they're already uploaded. So just to reiterate, if you were not can you not see them? Now, so what I need you to tell, I need one of you to go into My Place and I need you to tell me if you can now see the slides. Sometimes it's maybe difficult to understand all of the English. So there's a little bit more text on the slides, so it helps you maybe studying at home. Okay. So is everybody okay with that?
Okay, we find it.
They find it good, good. So when would you like to have the next one? When would you like to have the next lecture? Tomorrow?
Oh no.
Tomorrow? Is tomorrow at 10 o'clock good again? And we will do the next one? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So I will send you, I'll send a message on WeChat to say we'll do the next one. Is 10 o'clock a good time?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
So I will send you a message on WeChat to say that the next one will be tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Yeah?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so take care, enjoy the rest of your day. You're probably all just going to have your dinner, are you? Or have you had your dinner already?
Yeah.
You've had your dinner already. Okay, have a nice evening then. Are you guys, are you allowed to go outside again or you still have to stay inside? Are you allowed to go outside again?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can go outside.
Yes.
All right.
With
Can play
mask.
football.
With mask.
Because you know here we only allowed to leave our house once every day to go for a walk or to go for shopping. And we only are allowed to go for shopping
Or
if
toilet paper.
very necessary. Huh? Only for food shopping. Because they're trying to, there's a lot of, there's not so many in Scotland yet, but England has more. They're trying to slow down the spread of the virus, of the coronavirus, COVID-19. So that the NHS, the hospital, can cope with all the people getting ill. So we're kind of behind you guys. Obviously, you're further along because I understand that you don't have many new infections anymore. So you might be going back to school soon, no?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so we've just started. So maybe I won't be at my work for maybe 2 or 3 months. So it's going to be hard to stay at home for so long. Anyway, it was good to speak to you all, and I will see you again tomorrow, okay?
Okay.
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 Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.